Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, How Breath Carries Mind, Ins and Outs of Breathing in Yoga and Meditation, happened on March 3rd, 2021, as a science and spirituality dialogue with Judith Simmer-Brown, Shirley Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, A Year of Body, Speech, and Mind. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome everyone. My name is Alejandro Chaoul, and I'm going to be the host of this session. It's an honor to have Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche and Dr. Anacharya Judith Simmer-Brown and Dr. Shirley with us today as part of this dialogue that we started recently, actually started last month as a series of body, breath, and mind, and Rinpoche will talk more about the whole context of how we've been doing this. But this particular series we kicked off last month with Doctors Sadbir Khalsa as well as Dr. Lorenzo Cohen discussing on body. Today we'll be discussing on breath. Next month we'll be discussing on mind. So let me start by introducing Geshe Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who probably for this audience doesn't need much of an introduction. But when he was born in India from Tibetan parents and went to Menri Monastery in India for his Geshe degree, and then came to the West. And as he came to the West, he became this incredible teacher that all of us know. And he's been here for almost 30 years. And he, I think, is one of the pioneers of what he's calling Cyber Sangha, of this being able to be together in this kind of platforms. He's been teaching in the West, in Europe, in the States, for the last 3 decades. He's done a lot in person, traveling a lot, but also a lot in this platform. So it's really wonderful that he continues to expand through the Cyber Sangha. We have Shirley joining us from India, which is wonderful. I know it's night there, so thank you for being with us at this late hour. And as I promised, we will end promptly so you can go to bed at a more or less good time and get some rest. And Shirley has degrees both in the conventional medicine as well as in as an MPhil and PhD in neurophysiology, both with a focus on yoga practice. She has also received a Fulbright Fellow and a Templeton Foundation and the Creative Ideas for Neurobiology. So she brings this both a sense of a practitioner and a researcher. She is now the director of the Patanjali Research Foundation in Haridwar, India, and she has almost 200 research papers in this area. So we look forward to covering some of that. We have Acharya Judith Simmer-Brown, who also has a PhD and is a distinguished professor of contemplative and religious studies at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. She actually is one of the founding members of Naropa Institute. She's been a practitioner since the early 70s, a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. You can see a beautiful calligraphy of Chogyam Trungpa in her back. And then she became an Acharya, a senior teacher in this tradition by Sakyam Mipa Rinpoche. She's also the author of a book called Dakini's Warm Breath. So another way of talking about breath and that relation with sound sometimes. And so it's kind of again, for our triad, the body, breath, and mind. And there she explores the feminine principle as it reveals in meditation practice as well as everyday life in women and men. But she's also the co-editor in Meditation in the Classroom. So she's really interested in contemplative pedagogy, and particularly for religious studies. So without further ado, let me pass to Rinpoche, who will tell us more about the whole context and how he came with these great ideas. Rinpoche. Your mic is mute.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. I wanted to welcome Acharya Judith Simmer Brown and Shirley Tellis, and also our oldest Cyber Sangha member, and of course, Alex, who is our main host here. So just to start, some people might be watching first time. This is a part of our ongoing program. So on Cyber Sangha, we do a lot of different activities. And the whole idea of the Cyber Sangha is not limiting in one tradition, one system. It is basically everybody who is interested in personal and spiritual development from every faith background or even not believing in anything. So this is the place where we're trying to bring everybody in, and every approaches, either is a science, spirituality, belief, rituals, healing, everything. So this is an ongoing program. We're trying to do body, breath, and mind practices like every month on full moon. So last month we did on the body. This month we are focusing on the breath, and the next month we will be focusing on the mind. So we start this on a full moon, 24-hour cycle with some teaching, some guided meditation, and then we bring expert speakers to get enrich a little bit more understanding about these doors, body, breath, and mind. So that's what we have been doing. So I'm personally also very, very interested to continuously exploring, learning more, and also really as much as possible to bring my own life also. So just say a few words about the breath. In Tibetan tradition, generally we always speak in Tantra, like in a great perfection in Dzogchen, we say Lune, Lungne, Simne, the essential point of the body, the essential point of the, we say wind, or the breath. I will say a little bit about that, and then essential point about the mind. So body, breath, and mind in that sequence. And also in terms of the practices, that's always the case. There is a posture of the body, or there is a movement of the body that impacts how the channels and chakras rest in the body. Because of that, it impacts the wind, the prana, and then because of how it impacts the prana, it influences the mind. So it always never separated, never can be separated, never will be separated. Nobody has ability to separate these three things, but it's more question about how much people understand they're all connected so much, because in the end of the day, it is about development of self-development, which contains our body, breath, and mind totality together, not separate, where sometime in the West, so much focus on the body, breath, and the mind is left out. So, but also I think it's really important to understand when we talk about the breath and also when we talk about the lung, prana. So sometimes we would think about rhythmic breath. So this is rhythmic breath, the breath we breathe, and it has something to do with the outer air, oxygen, and so on. But this is not where it limits. This is where actually it starts. But then it goes on much more than this rhythmic breath, or even more than maybe even oxygen, I guess. So it's more than that. So how does it becomes more than that? When awakening experiences happens in the mind. For example, a simple attention. For example, we have a motion then we have a movement of energy of the prana, then we have an awakening of the mind. So these three things follows together. Every time there's a movement in the body, there is a movement of energy. Every time there's a movement of energy, it impacts some experiences of the consciousness. So somehow, in the end, it is always the main purpose, and at least in the Dzogchen, the Buddhist tradition, is how to awaken our mind by deeper understanding and particularly more subtler understanding, not only rhythmic breath, but the subtle prana of the wind. We call Lung Sim Tawa, the subtle wind and subtle awareness, and their union is the most important part of this journey. So anyway, so that's kind of, I just wanted to say a little bit, because sometimes people think about breathing exercise has only something to do with this, has nothing to do with awareness, because whenever you're aware of something, when I'm happy, there is a wind there, there's a breath there, there is a warmth there, but it's not a rhythmic breath. This is not what I'm breathing. So I think it's important to understand that distinction. Anyway, so I don't want to speak more here, and the cybersangha.net will be where you can find out more information. So please welcome our speakers, Alex. Yeah.
Thank you, Rinpoche. And that's perfect, because that's how we decided, right, to title this conversation, How Breath Carries Mind. And as Rinpoche says, these three are not, and we were talking last time with Lorenzo and Sadbir as well, they cannot really be separated. But as we talk, we can talk about the things and how they become that link. And for example, breath being kind of a link between between body and mind. Now, as I mentioned many times, what I really enjoy in these conversations is getting to know each other as people, and particularly as practitioners in this Cyber Sangha. So one of the first questions I like to ask both of you, and I'll start with Dr. Shirley Tellis, is how did you become a practitioner of yoga, or how did you become interested in yoga? Because even living in India doesn't mean that everyone is interested in yoga. So please.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this dialogue and giving me a question which makes me go back in time. So actually, I did not grow up in India, so I truly did not know much about yoga at all. It was just one book in our bookcase which my mother had bought because of her interest. So after I completed medicine, I wanted to do research on the brain. That's all I knew. And when I wanted to do research on the brain, I went to an institute which was researching the brain, and my guide said, you need to do research on yoga. I was very upset because I did not like the idea at all. And at the time, I was a very anxious person. I'm still rather anxious now, but much less. And it manifested as breathing abnormalities, almost like bronchial asthma. So this was my pre-doctoral phase. And I was still not interested in yoga as a topic of my research till I practiced it. And once I had 3 practice sessions, then I was convinced that that was the topic which I wanted to research, because I could already see, just as you already mentioned, the connection between the brain, body. I could see a relaxation in my chest and an ease in my breathing. And that has taken me forward. I think now it's 30 years that I'm on this path. So that's the answer.
How wonderful. How wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Judith, what brought you into the path of being a practitioner and then a teacher, of course?
Oh, it seems like such a long story, but I can take a nugget from my adolescence. As the daughter of a Methodist minister living in Nebraska, I, as a teenager, became really interested in the story of John Wesley, who was a British Christian minister who got into spirituality through what he called methodical prayer. And he had an experience of the heart strangely warmed that just absolutely penetrated me when I was maybe 14 or 15 years old. I had such a sense, almost like a past life recognition of some kind of simple spiritual connection of the heart strangely warmed. And so secretly, without my parents knowing, I started an early morning Bible contemplation and just sitting quietly with myself. And this started me on a journey that eventually led me to the Dharma. I went through a variety of explorations and experiences, too many to mention, but it started with this sense of the reason the Methodists are called Methodists is because of methodical prayer, meaning basically daily practice called morning watch of sitting quietly with oneself and the heart becoming strangely warmed. So could I also add something about this topic of breath and about the heart strangely warmed? This seems to be such an important time to be talking about breath, because at the time of COVID, we're dealing with a virus that affects people in their lungs and in their breathing. And we are exposed to the virus through breathing. We are wearing masks to protect our breathing. And there's enormous fear about breathing and about the kind of dangers of being infected with the virus. And then when we add that to the time in the United States of the killing of George Floyd and his cries to his mother that he couldn't breathe, it feels to me we have been very deeply touched in our hearts by issues around breathing and breath being deprived of us or being threatened in some kind of way. And it's a wonderful time to bring forward the spiritual teachings on breathing, because these have a possibility of really helping us in our life to reclaim our breath and to feel a sense of enormous nourishment and intimacy of breath. So I wanted to bring that in because it seems that such an important and relative topic right now, especially because in our breathing, we experience our interdependence, sharing air and breathing with all other living creatures. It's such a profound topic, breath. And so I really appreciate being invited to be part of this dialogue. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you for bringing that. That's so important. And actually, in our conversations back and forth, Shirley, you mentioned how for you is this importance of yoga breathing and spiritual evolution. So similar to what Judith is saying. Do you want to touch on that topic?
Yes. If we actually look at the relevance of the breath and breath regulation in yoga, the very first point that I would like to make is that there's a very lovely verse which appears in one of the classical texts which dates back to the 15th century. This text is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, a very practical text about how to practice yoga. And in the second chapter, verse 16, there is this verse which very clearly states that if we regulate the breath, and I'm actually paraphrasing it a little, then we are able to still and regulate the flow of the prana. And if we can regulate the pranic flow, then we can regulate the chitta, where the chitta is the mind stuff. And this is a beautiful prelude to the whole concept of breath regulation as an entry point to the rest of internal sadhana, to dharana, dhyana, and of course to pratyahara preceding these two stages, which is regulation of our senses. So how much should we pay attention to? From which sensory stimuli should we withdraw? So this kind of selection, this kind of fine-tuning of our senses happens through pranayama. So pranayama is a mandatory step. Voluntary breath regulation in yoga is the obvious step to precede entry into meditation. So that's
Wonderful. And let me actually continue with you a little bit, because I'd like to hear some of the research, and you have published 200 papers, so we can't go over everything, but some of the research that you think would be relevant for our audience to hear from what you've done with breathing.
Okay, so I'm going to actually begin with a study which is not done by me, but is very relevant to many of our research studies. So I would like to present that here because I think it's very important to this dialogue. The study in question was conducted by an author called Herrero and his colleagues from a medical institute or medical school located in New York. And it was published in the Journal of Neurophysiology in 2018. Now, this study was a very elegant one. It involved 8 adults who had electrodes implanted in their brain. These electrodes were not implanted for research, so there was no ethical issue here, but they were implanted for therapeutic reasons, very much in the knowledge and consent of the people. And then these people who had these little electrodes in their brain agreed to be part of this very interesting experiment. What was the experiment? The experimenters asked these 8 adults to practice on some days at different times voluntary or will regulation of the breath. At other times, they were asked to be aware of their breath as a witness. Now, why is this relevant to yoga breathing? Both voluntary regulation and breath awareness are very integral parts of all pranayama practices. So when they practiced it and then they recorded the neural activity by the indwelling electrodes, and they found something very interesting. There were distinct areas and there were areas of overlap. When the people regulated their breath at will, there was a very interesting circuit lighting up with activity in the brain. And this was the frontotemporal insular circuit, a very fundamental circuit for attention and awareness, and I'll come to that in a few seconds. On the other hand, when they were practicing breath awareness, the areas were discrete and distinct. For example, there was the anterior cingulate area, which is very fundamental to being able to focus and concentrate. There was the hippocampus, which is our sort of storehouse for memories. And there was also the frontal cortex, which is so important for being a human, what is called the character cortex. So these were some of the areas which were lighting up. But what was common to voluntary breath regulation and breath awareness was a little island of gray matter called the insula, which has a very important role in allowing us to be self-aware and to have interoception, being aware of our internal sensations, as well as self-aware of all our thoughts, our perceptions, and so on. And so we see that indeed the neurophysiological evidence at this stage really does support the fact that pranayama helps us not just to be attentive, to concentrate, to direct our thoughts in a very focused way, because there are many ways to train our attention and concentration, but to switch off and to be able to go within. This probably is the beautiful contribution of breath regulation through yoga and indeed through many other healing traditions, as we are seeing in this lovely platform, which do involve voluntary breath regulation and breath awareness. Just one more point on the research as we move a little more subtly, and I'm not yet going to touch on prana, and I will not in this few minutes. So this research actually describes what happens if we synchronize our breath with a particular thought. It could be a very powerful syllable, like the Sanskrit syllable Om, primordial sound, and so many other descriptions of Om, which I will not go into. What if we compare in the laboratory the physiological changes when a person is synchronizing their breath with the thought of Om on one day, synchronizing their breath with the thought of another monosyllable, maybe one or none or bon, which has no specific spiritual significance. There are 3 findings, and I'm really synthesizing many studies in order to be brief, across different research groups, including ours, looking at various methods, fMRI and other electrophysiological methods. What are the findings? So when one synchronizes one's breath with this meaningful syllable, and it's also been done in the Buddhist tradition, I am happy to say, to this group. But what are the findings? The first is, directing one's thoughts becomes more effortless, needing less effort. First finding. Second finding, there's a sort of equilibrium in the emotions. So even if people are shown stimuli which can evoke positive or negative emotions, they remain equanimous or balanced. And the third one, which is not so much supported by neurobiology, but by self-reports of the participants, was that when they practice this, synchronizing it with a meaningful syllable, then they reach a state of flow. They're just one with the experience, which is so beautiful to imagine. And they also have many positive feelings, gratitude, self-transcendence, and so on. And these are a few of the findings at this stage that I would like to mention.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful that you can condense the studies and give us kind of the pith results. Wonderful. Thank you. Which leads me actually to Judith, to these ideas that in the traditions, particularly in the tradition that you're in, they talk about levels of understanding of breath. So if you want to go into that.
Well, I thank you, Shirley, so much for this summary of this fascinating research. And there are many ways in which the scientific research parallels the sacred literature about breath. So this is a wonderful conversation. I think about my own journey of over the many years of practice of beginning to discover different levels of what breath really is and how breath manifests in experience. And I realize in my own journey, it repeats things that I see in layers in the Buddhist tradition as well. So I think I will share this as my own personal journey, recognizing that it is also reflected in the tradition. When the Buddha first taught mindfulness, he had a variety of ways to help people become mindful. And one of the most famous, of course, is breath. In the Anapanasati Sutta, he talked about breath as the object of meditation, the object of attention in meditation. And I think about my first experience in meditation, and particularly under the guidance of a teacher, when I started out as a Zen student of Suzuki Roshi and began to really focus on placing my attention on breathing. And then when my thoughts, when I wandered off into thoughts, of coming back to breathing and counting breaths. So my very first experience of really close placement mindfulness was counting the breaths up to 10 or 20 and then going back to the beginning every time I lost track. That's very much in keeping with what Rinpoche was talking about the rhythmic breathing of in and out. And it is the most sort of outer level of the way in which breath is used in Buddhism is mindfulness of breathing. It is an object of meditation we always have with us. We don't need any particular objects in our world. We can be mindful of breathing while commuting to work. We can be mindful of breathing in our sleep, in the dark. We don't need special circumstances. And so that is sort of the most immediate way that we learn to settle ourselves. And I think anyone who's practiced even the very basics of mindfulness experiences the kind of settled calm that comes from placing attention on breathing. But once we do this for a while, the thing that begins to emerge is some recognition of connection, just what Shirley was talking about self-awareness, that we begin to develop not only a stable attention, we begin to come to know something about the inner workings of our own minds. And we begin to feel things, and we begin to notice emotions and thoughts we may not have noticed before. We begin to notice a contrast between being present with breathing and the drifting off into thoughts or emotions. And noticing that contrast is such a powerful moment of such a powerful time. And this begins to attune us to the subtle energies of our bodies. So as Rinpoche was talking about the notion of lung, there's the outer rhythmic breathing, and then there's the inner energetic movement of energy through our bodies that is known in Tibetan as lung. And this notion of actually discovering a kind of dynamic energetic quality to the body is such a powerful discovery. And in the texts in Tantra, we read about what's called the Manomaya Kaya, the body made of mind. We begin to discover there is a subtle body that is not just the gross, coarse body, and it's not what we think of as the mind. It's an energetic flow in our bodies that's referred to as lung. It's a lung that carries the energy of that through the channels of the body. So even starting with simple paying attention to breath can eventually lead us to awareness of movement of energy through our bodies. And I remember my earliest instructions from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche were about synchronizing body and mind, that those were the most pervasive meditation instructions we were giving in our sitting practice, synchronizing body and mind so that then mind begins to ride the breath and begins to ride the subtle channels of the body. And it gives us such a different experience of body and of mind to connect with lung in that way. And then as I studied in the tradition and also went further in my own tantric practice, I began to find that the oral teachings from one's Vajrayana teacher are referred to as whispers. There's a quality of intimacy and breath that comes in transmission from one's teacher. So there's a quality that breath comes not just in the body and not just the rhythmic breathing, but also in the direct communication of the oral instructions from teacher to student is spoken of as the whispered lineage. And I'm very much a practitioner of the whispered lineage, where there's a sense that the communication from my teacher has not been just words, but it's been a whole transmission of intimate communication that is spoken of as whispers. And then finally, on the most sort of innermost level, there's a quality that when we totally synchronize body and mind, when we begin to tune into the subtle channels of the body, when we attune ourselves to the oral instructions of our teacher, we begin to find the origin of mind or the nature of mind, which is the most subtle whisper of all. And so the theme of breath is carried all the way through the many layers of practice. And when I wrote my book, Dakini's Warm Breath, I began to discover about this term, Khandro Drolung, which is the blessing of wisdom that comes from one's practice lineage. And the title of my book came from a dream of seeing my teacher, and he whispered in my ear, Khandro Drolung. And that whisper then stayed with me and had to become the title of my book. So there's a sense that breath ties together all the different discoveries and stages of our journey, from the most simple mindfulness of breathing carries through in a kind of continuous breath down to the most subtle discoveries of the nature of mind. So breath is a very, very powerful portal to the depths of profundity of spiritual practice.
Thank you, Judith. Beautiful. Rinpoche, I wanted, of course, for you to continue in this breath, but also I was wondering if you would share, in your vast training, when do you remember when breath was brought up, the first time, or, within the practices? I know, as a young monk, you might start first with mantras and mudras and things that, you could do as a child that kind of gets you into that. But when did breath become important in your practice?
So in what I remember, it's probably around age 11, around 11 years old. I went to Lobe Sanje Tenzin to receive POA practice. It's called transference of consciousness. So the main part of the POA practice was using the breath, but like a breath and sound, strong sound, to open the channel and open the crown. So So that was the main practice, first time, and as a 11, 12 years old, I was not the one who was very still, very hyper, a lot of movement, a lot of doing things all the time. And for me, sitting alone doing practice was a little bit hard. And so I did practice, but every day morning I go down to his place and he will see if there's any signs here, a little hole here or not. He said, no. And the next day I go, no. He said, your head is like a rock, no signs. So then in the end, he said, okay, what about all of you sit together? And we were other monks, were like older monks, so we sat together in one night, I think a couple of nights, practiced together, did the poa, and then the result came. So that was my first experience with more formal practice of using breath to really like some sense of physical shift in the channel, in the chakra. Other than that, I think the breath has been always a big part of my interest as upbringing and teaching as a teacher and also in life. And I truly, truly believe that the higher understanding of the breath is the future medicine. Basically, the subtle awareness understanding of the medicine is the future medicine. And something medicine with no side effect, medicine, something that you have with you all the time, is a matter of how much you wanted to be aware or awaken and utilize or not.
Thank you, Rinpoche. And actually, let me continue with you for a moment, particularly in this topic of medicine, breath as medicine, that Judith also mentioned, particularly now in times of COVID, and how, and with George Floyd, this "I can't breathe," and so this aspect of noticing in our society all the restrictions of breath, and then you growing up in this place where breath was such a tool to spiritual awakening. If you want to say a little bit about that and how, as you say, kind of breath is medicine, or breath as medicine.
So, yeah, I think breath, and as I think Shirley and Judith both mentioned, that some sense of breath is a strong tie connection to the prana, the different layers of prana, the subtler. And basically, breath is a life. If there is no breath, there is no life. So the tie between vitality of life force and the breath is so strongly tied together. So when we notice that, when we growing older, we don't breathe as deep. Our breath gets shallower, and whenever we are fearful, our breath gets shorter, or sometimes we hold the breath. And even in the night, sometimes in the positions where you can certain area, when you wake up in the morning and when 3, 4 in the morning, and when you're having a hard time to go back to sleep, you can see there's certain areas of the body, it's more blocked. There's no less of flow there. And you can even feel some physical discomfort. So, and then of course, I always find it interesting to bring the breath in those areas of the body and breathe out. It's like taking an inner shower. Basically, bring the clear water in, shake it, throw it out. But it's not a water, it's the air you are doing. And when you repeat again and again, it's really, really helpful. And another thing I will say that is it's interesting, like when we talk about generally breath kind of carrying the mind, but also very often in personal experiences, we feel mind is actually interfering the breath also, For example, you think about, you have a disturbing thought that makes you difficult to fall asleep or difficult to rest your mind, disturbing thought. And then you think that, okay, I'm not going to think about these thoughts. I'm going to get help from my breath. So you're focusing on the breath. So your idea is you're in and you're doing deep breathing, but the thought comes back saying, you don't even know when the thought came back. Is it the first time came back, third time, fourth time? But in the middle, already you're not breathing anymore again. Thought interfering your breath rather than breath supporting your mind. So this struggle between the mind and the breath is also, I think, I think we all go through that, but I feel like it's really, really important that in a deep insight to know that if you're able to regulate your breath more with your familiarity to your practices, then eventually the mind will stop. These fear will stop. Eventually, you will breathe deeper. Eventually, the energy will be more flower. You will feel more sense of freedom and joy and expression of your humor and joy more when you are able to regulate your breath. So, some sense, I think, knowing it, believing in it, trusting in it, and not giving up in the breath. If you really want a success in some flow of mind, I think that's how I think it's important. Yeah.
Thank you. Shirley, let me come back to you. First of all, you've trained both in conventional medicine and also in neurophysiology, and you both focused on yoga. And as you were telling us a little while ago, at the beginning, this was not the direction that you wanted to go. But somehow it seems, if I understood well, that practicing kind of, got you interested, kind of brought that bug of interest in you. And can you tell us a little more about that and how now with your knowledge of conventional medicine and neurophysiology, how that started making sense?
So yeah, that's a nice question to ask me because I like mentioning it. At that point, it was understanding about yoga, to begin with a lot of theoretical knowledge, which did not move me. But later on, as I had a practice session, and this was arranged by my research guide in the way of trying to evoke some interest from me about yoga. At first, I didn't have any belief that practicing would make me interested. So it sounds funny to say that when I say my whole life has been after that in yoga. Well, when I practiced, I noticed the first thing was a change in my easy arousability. I could feel that I had become more relaxed, and that night I had a very deep sleep, and this consistently remains my experience whenever I do a particularly long and sustained practice. Whenever I practiced that night, I could say anything more than 30 minutes sustained, synchronizing with the breath, it's almost a guarantee that the sleep will be good. In case in travel or some other time it's interrupted, it's been my experience, may sleep well, but it won't be that wonderful, deep, and refreshing. So this has been my experience consistently after that initial one. The other ease I felt was that even if I did get a little breathless, remember I did mention that I had a starting point where I used to feel choked, a bit like bronchial asthma. Whenever I had a slight sensation of feeling breathless, I'd get into a lot of panic and feel I want to take some medicine or do something very quickly, which would make it worse. But as I started practicing yoga, just a week into the practice, that panic was no longer there. So I'm happy to say that I used to keep some medicine with me, but even going to the highest motorable road in the world, which is in Ladakh, I went without any medicine, and I feel so good. And I said, this is the effect of yoga for me. So I would say that is the thing. The good sleep, the general physical well-being, but even more, conquering the panic about it. Because as you have mentioned, talking about George Floyd or about COVID, a great feature, and this is now talking from the angle of conventional medicine, if a person has any breathing difficulty and then they experience actual real difficulty, so the person has a diagnosed condition, but they can normally breathe reasonably well. Then for some reason on one particular day, there's an actual tangible difficulty. Now the mind then kicks in and says, I'm going to get choking, I will may even be an existential problem. I may die. And at that time, the panic is further worsening of the breathing condition. The bronchi become tight and constricted. The person gets breathless, and the panic only worsens it still further. But if a person, now, does it mean that if a person has asthma, they should disregard their symptoms? No. But panic is never good. Same way in COVID, if people can relax, possibly being aware of their oxygen levels, it would not lead to burning more oxygen and getting into a breathless state. This makes sense even with very conventional medicine. The more anxious we are, the more sympathetic drive we are, the more oxygen we are burning. And if we have a slight breathlessness, we'll be taking ourselves to extreme breathlessness quicker. If we can tone it down while being aware of the situation, so that we're not crazily complacent, so to speak. A person whose oxygen is really plummeted is feeling very happy. That's not good. But sort of a good balance. I think that's what we can get and what I really felt.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for this little jewels of advice of how to use this in our daily life, which is, I know, what Rinpoche always likes to give as well. Judith, I wanted to shift topics a little bit. Knowing all these vast, incredible knowledge that we get from these wonderful texts and from these oral traditions and the whispering traditions, there's some of it that it's secret, that we are only allowed to practice in certain ways and only with certain people. I know this is a topic that both you and I have discussed in the past, and I love to bring your perspective to this group.
Yes, we have talked about this, and Ali, thank you so much for bringing this up, because you and I are both practicing in traditions with subtle body practices that, at least in my lineage, are kept incredibly private and secret, not to be shared with anybody. And that's not always true in most lineage or other lineages. So you and I have talked about what the difference might be. I think that there's part of it is just a kind of long time tradition, but I've thought about it a great deal, particularly because of being a Naropa University professor and also somebody who's written about Tantra and trying to identify where is the line about what is good to share and valuable, beneficial to share, and what is not, aside from the advice of my teachers or the cautions of my teachers. First of all, I think there's a famous phrase in Vajrayana that something must be experienced to be known. And I know about myself that as somebody who loves to do research and to read, and there's so many wonderful books on spirituality out there, many teachings that in the past have been unavailable that are now available if you have an Amazon account. You have a chance to actually read all kinds of things about practices. I know for myself that if I think I know something, that very often it prevents me from really knowing it. That sense of the intellect getting ahead of the heart or of the actual embodied experience. And so it seems to me the wisdom of an esoteric tradition, keeping things private, is to allow us the naivete and innocence of being able to be exposed to a practice and to an experience and actually have the experience rather than think I have the experience. And as an academic, it's epidemic for people to think they know something that they've never experienced. There are all these people out there in academia who are talking about practices and religious experiences that they themselves have never really experienced personally. And so I think there's some wisdom in keeping these things private to keep people from thinking they know something that they don't. The other experience that I have as a longtime Naropa faculty member, and I've been at Naropa since the late 1970s, And teachers have come through and offered programs and revealed esoteric instructions to students. And students, my academic students, haven't always had the preparation. They do not have the motivation. They don't have the relationship with the teacher. And I've seen students have traumatic reactions and having very extreme PTSD experiences of having some kind of opening, unguarded opening that they were not prepared for and that they are afraid of. And I think there's wisdom in keeping teachings and practices that are so powerful, that have such an ability to transform our experience of our bodies, of our world, of what's true, and to make sure that the environment is protected, that the motivation is clear, that the trust in the teacher is unsullied, that there's a mutual agreement about what kind of territory we're traversing when we get into some of these esoteric teachings and practices. And so with that, very much in terms of my own very deep trust in my own teachers, as also a critical thinker, I feel that that is a wise approach, given the kind of society we live in, where things so quickly become materialistic and become commodities that then we can share to burnish our resumes and the toolbox of what we can teach, that it's very important to keep the sense of the integrity of the esoteric in a private setting where there's mutual understanding and agreement and deep commitment about what it is we're doing. So some of the breath practices that I have done for many years that have been extremely important to me, I would never share with any of my students at Naropa or any of my students, my Dharma students, who are not yet prepared to do those kinds of practices. So thanks so much for asking me about this, Ali.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you. You reminded me when I was in grad school in religious studies, and I came actually with the support of Rinpoche and Lopun because I wanted to understand academically what I was practicing. And yet I found, as you say, many students that were there more for the intellectual. And I was like, why do you care? On the other hand, when Rinpoche started the 7-year training and he brought Lopun, Yongdzin Rinpoche, he had just published his book from the Kunzang Nintik, the Hard Drops of Dharmakaya in English. And on one hand, we were in a retreat setting, but he was very surprised that people could get it. I guess we didn't have Amazon then, but people could get it in a bookstore and just read it. And he was like, really? So yes, this is important. So Rinpoche, I mean, you've been trained in this tradition, and then you came here and you made decisions and, well, yes, I can bring this in this specific way and open, and look how marvelous people are opening. For example, when I talk to people in our Sangha, and I say that at the beginning, Tsalung was not part, we had the succession practice and so forth. And now Tsalung, in all our 35 plus centers of Ligmincha International, everyone practices them. And it's beautiful how people are opening. Rinpoche, do you want to say a word on that? You're muted. Maybe it's secret.
Whispered.
So I think this question is really very interesting, and I also thought about a lot, and sometimes people discuss about these things. So let me see how I'm going to say about it. I think there's a few things that are happening. One is more around this conversation around this. I think it's a little bit confusing what is secret and what is okay to be shared. And that it seems like not very clear. So I think generally, like if you look in Tibetan culture, there's a lot of, like if you go to Nepal, there's a lot of old people, every kind of people circumambulating the temple and with the mala, and just some are very serious about the practice, some are talking about their businesses, some of them are talking about the relationship. Meanwhile, they are circumambulating and reciting the mantra. So this is all combination cultural thing. But if you go in China or in India, Baba Ramdev is teaching a yoga, and there are like hundreds of all these Indian lay people just doing the breathing exercise. Everybody's doing breathing exercise. And Qigong in China, in a public garden, there everybody's doing Tai Chi and Qigong. And Tibetan people are left out. Just recite the mantra and circumambulate the temple. You don't get the breathing practice. That's strange. I think culturally, I feel it's very strange. Yeah, there's something not right about it, personally. And so why Tibetan people should be missed? So now people are coming to India, then since they're not getting nothing out of Tibetan teachers, they're sneaking out to Baba Ramdev. And then learning something from Baba Ramdev and bringing it back to the Tibetan community, saying, do these breathing. We already have these traditions so much rich in our own. But where is the guidelines? What can be taught and what should not be taught? I think a lot of confusion around it. So personally, where I make decisions, or where I had made decision consulting with my teacher, is, like a 9 breathing or purification. I mean, what's the problem with the 9 breathing or purification to teach with a little deeper knowledge? People are breathing. People should breathe. If you don't breathe, you die. But breathing with some more awareness and some more understanding or better breathing, I think it's clearly makes sense. So that's what I talk with my teachers. So of course you teach, it's okay. Where people are anytime people are doing an amazing big initiations on. I never do initiations online. I never do big initiations and rituals and anything like that. But I do talk about breathing and teach breathing. I don't really want to introduce so many different tantric yoga and the deities and the very fancy rituals. I don't do those things. But I do talk so much about awareness. So I think certain things needed to be more clear about what are the things, at least from the Tibetan traditional point of view. When we say like a secret, we talk about more introduction to the mandala or in the deity or some breathing related to these aspects. Those are kept, and I think those should be kept secret. First of all, I think it's important. And also, I don't know how many people are interested anyway. Okay, please keep it secret. I don't get it. And probably those you claim to get it, you never get it either. And you get, then at some point you have people who are saying, I've been practicing Vajra tantric practice for such a long time. Instead of really getting it, feeling depressed and guilt of not able to do these practices, you should be free right from the beginning and not get into it. Keep it simple. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
My teacher used to say that best not to get into Vajrayana, just best not to even do it. If you do, you have to do it completely. But if you have any question, you should just forget it, because there are other things to do with your life.
Thank you. And particularly breathing is an important thing. So as we close, and I want to respect particularly Dr. Tellis's time before go to sleep, let me go to you. Any final comment that Dr. Tellis you want to tell us?
In connection or continuation with what we've just spoken about, secrecy and precautions, I would also like to say that while yoga breathing practices are largely safe, they are very powerful. And so safety considerations are essential, especially for those which are supposed to be able to unleash the subtle energy, the prana, and particularly in the form of kundalini. And these practices have to be done under close supervision and very carefully. There are also certain prescribed checks, what are called locks and bandhas. So That's the only point that I would like to add.
Thank you so much. A very, very important point of caution as well. Thank you, and thank you for being with us. Judith, any last thought or last comment?
I think the one remaining thing is on a slightly different topic, and that is just acknowledging how important breath is, not just in Buddhism and religions coming from India, but my home tradition that I was raised in Christianity, the talk about the Holy Spirit. The word spirit means breath. And the Holy Spirit is spoken of as the breath of God, and the sense of a sudden sense of the heart strangely warmed is described as a Holy Spirit experience. So that sense of breath being holy and being sacred in world traditions extends into Western religion as well. I think that it's sometimes the emphasis is so much on Asian traditions putting emphasis on breath, but it's definitely there in the Abrahamic traditions as well, where the breath of God is very, very important. So I just wanted to extend that out to people in the Cyber Sangha who may be new to Asian religions and have a lot of exposure to Abrahamic religions.
Thank you. As our common friend Andy Fort would say, it's both east and west of Jerusalem. So we have them. So Rinpoche, any final thoughts or comments?
Well, I want to just thank Judith and Shirley, and it was wonderful to meet both of you and to know your work. And so I just wanted to thank, and now I wanted to say that all our Cyber Sangha member. So I hope that among this conversation, you found something how to integrate the silence and the breath together, bringing it together in this month and really engage practice. And thank you, Alex, for coordinating this wonderfully and putting a lot of energy, time into organizing this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Judith. This has been wonderful. Thank you in the technology side. Daniel and Milos, and I know Polly has been working so hard, and Mariela as our chat host or chat master. And our next, as Rinpoche said, next month will be Mind for the full moon practice, for his teaching, as well as for our dialogue, which is going to be April 6th. And it's going to be with Elisa Cosasa from Einstein Hospital down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Eve Ekman from the Greater Good Foundation or Center up in Berkeley, California, actually close to you, Rinpoche. So thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful. Thank you again, Judith, Shirley, Rinpoche. Have a great rest of the day, and Shirley, night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.